Drew, thank you so much for being on the show and happy 4th of July. I know it's a holiday weekend coming up here when we are all celebrating and really appreciate you just like breaking out of this awesome time and just being on the show. Why don't you take a quick second to just tell folks a little bit about your background?
Awesome. Yeah, super excited to be here. I think this is going to be a really fun topic to dive in on. But just a little bit about me. I build sales development teams. That's what I've been doing with my career over the last decade. Recently, I took a new position that was a little bit different, but it'll be fun to sort of dive in as to why I did that and some of the journey that's been going on there. But I'm a hardcore B2B sales nerd. I've just been deep in this space for a long time. I've become obsessed with some of the concepts, especially around sales development, and I've turned that into a consulting offering. I've been consulting with companies for a long time, but it's really fun to finally have an offering that is very concrete, very actionable, and very impactful for the companies that I'm working with.
And I know that when we first connected, you were in that SDR or sales development leadership role. What are some of the key takeaways from that journey that you've been able to sort of derive from that transition from SDR leader now to AE?
Yeah, so there's a lot that went into that journey. I mean, the two biggest components was the one biggest component was I became obsessed with two concepts, and I mean obsessed, like not like interested, like oh this is kind of fun, but like obsessed. And the concepts were really straightforward. They were efficiency and effectiveness or efficacy.
Mm.
I knew I had a sales team. I knew that they were able to accomplish X when we did, when we worked hard, but we needed to go accomplish 2X. And I was like, okay, I can hire an army of reps and just like throw more human time at it. Or we can actually figure out what's most effective, where we're able to drive results, and how we're able to double down on where we're most effective and then do it in less time. And so
Mm.
in that journey, I was building up a team. At that point, I think I probably had 12 or 13 reps, a couple managers under me, and I started onboarding tools. I was like, if we were going to go for efficiency and we want to have consistency, let me see if there's some tooling that we can do to really empower that type of motion. I found a company called Orum. I onboarded that as a tool. That tool had such a massive impact on our overall results. I had to explore what that company was doing because anytime you find sort of a rocket ship in the startup space, it's worth at least keeping an eye on, if not maybe joining the team. And so it eventually ended up playing out that way. The person who I ended up buying from, I ended up working for, and ended up being a really fantastic relationship. And so now I'm in an individual contributor role for the first time in a long time, absolutely loving it.
And as an IC, are there any sort of, I don't want to say pros and cons, but I think that's just in an effort to kind of speak to maybe some of the contrast there. Any sort of pros and cons that you have been experiencing so far compared to your days as a leader of SDRs?
Now, look, it's likely that I'm gonna get back into sales development leadership probably sometime soon. But as an IC, there are some definite advantages. Like the big one is my commission is my own. My performance determines my own income. So rather than my team's performance, so that's just kind of a minor nice to have. But I think one of the other things that's very validating is that now that I'm working with dozens of companies on how to drive efficiency and effectiveness in their organizations, I'm noticing consistently across the board that a lot of organizations are running into the same problems. And there's something about that that's just very validating. Oh, they're also concerned they cannot
Mm.
fill up their pipeline enough to actually hit their revenue goals. And it's almost like everybody is facing this. I've run into two companies who are like, we don't need more pipeline. And both of those situations, I was like, wait, let me understand a little bit more.
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody says that. Yeah.
Well, I was actually going to ask you about this pipeline topic because the vast majorities of sales organizations are failing to hit, at least from what I can tell, right, their goals. And I think the discussion that, I've seen some of your content is it's not because they can't close, right? But it's because they can't generate enough quality pipeline. Like, I know this is hard to answer in, 5 minutes or whatnot, right? But at a high level, how can we do this well and then scale it? And I think that your experience leading SDRs probably makes you a pretty killer AE because you literally understand the top of the funnel, right?
Yeah, yeah. It is a really big topic. And honestly, the organizations who understand the importance of this and act on it are the ones who are going to differentiate themselves in the market. We constantly see companies failing left and right. And the vast majority of the time, it's because they either can't find a market that wants what they're selling, or they can't fill their pipeline with quality opportunities. So, in order to fill your pipeline with quality opportunities, it really has to come down to who is it that's buying, what's most important to them, who actually has the power to make a decision, and how do you get in front of them both effectively with the right messaging. I know that I just kind of listed off a few things, but within all of those components, there's massive amounts of details that a lot of people are skipping over. The main thing is what is the value of a connect to you? Whether it's an email reply or you connect with somebody on the phone, how valuable is that? Can you put a number to that? You actually can put a number to that. It's just a matter of doing the math. What are your conversion rates? What is the average contract value in that market segment? How many conversations do you need to get a booked meeting? How many booked meetings end up being qualified? You do the math, you work backwards, and you'll find that actually, if you're getting connected to the right person, that connection, that conversation, that phone call, that phone connect, that could be worth hundreds of dollars to your organization. Now, the question becomes, like, are you prioritizing that? Are you optimizing for that? Do you have the right messaging for the rep in front of them to have a meaningful conversation to convert that? Are your reps spending an hour to make 30 calls to get connected to the one person, and that one person no longer works at that company? Like, how efficient is your organization? A lot of teams operate that way. A lot of teams are throwing time at calling and other activities and not driving pipeline. So really, it becomes a really important question as to who's actually buying your product. Not only the company profile, not only what is important to that company, but who are the contacts at that company who are actually most interested in engaging in the problem that you address, and how do you get in front of them with the right messaging, and how do you do that at scale? Those are like, I know we're just kind of skimming past these, but each one of these is just such a meaty topic, and each one of them are really often really challenging for organizations to dig deep on and figure out, how do we actually fill our pipeline? Have we ever filled our pipeline? What is the maximum capacity of the number of opportunities that we can work as a sales organization? These are really critical questions to actually have a really clear answer on if you want to scale and you want to have a really successful sales motion.
Now, there's been a lot of discussion about like signal based selling and stuff like that. I say it like that because it's not a new thing, right? Like, since I got into SaaS specifically in 2008, we were looking at signals. There was a tool called Leadlander,
Mm.
which was nowhere near what's available here today, but nevertheless was diving into signals. And you talked about kind of trying to identify who's most interested, who's most qualified, these sort of things. Any sort of recommendations or tips that you have on identifying those kind of signals, right? And determining, hey, here are the personas, here are the, even within the set of personas, here are the individual stakeholders who you should really prioritize. And I think that's probably a good segue into what I wanted to ask you next is, like, how do you actually prioritize accounts and then also those contacts within the account?
Yeah, if this is your first year in sales, it's going to be hard. It's going to be a lot of trying, it's a lot of trial and error. You're going to have to collect data. But if you've been doing sales for at least a year, if you've had some team members, if you've had some opportunities, the majority of the time you can actually start to just anchor on based on what you already know. So taking a look at your current data set, who's actually bought your product? What is your defined ideal customer profile, and how many of your actual customers fit within that profile? Because there's going to be situations where you're going to onboard customers and they're actually not ideal customers. The question becomes, do we optimize for them, or do we exclude them in our ideal customer profile? But when you're developing that profile, it needs to be something that's iterated every quarter. It needs to be anchored to data. And that data should really be based on real world actionable stuff. So most often, what I like to do is take a quick look at closed won and closed loss opportunities. Start there. Like, you're going to learn a lot just from your own opportunities. Why did people buy? Why did they not buy? These are going to be critical components to understanding which types of companies would be best to work with. It's hard to get more granular than that without getting specific and talking about like specific companies, and then it becomes sort of less relevant for folks in general. But to get really specific on, maybe just Orum in general, we work with B2B sales companies. So that's sort of at the highest level that you got to be that, right? The other component is that we work with organizations who want to drive more results with less time. They want to be efficient. They want to scale up the efficiency of their organization. How do you develop a signal for that? How do you evaluate that? How do you take that? Well, we know we need this. How do we incorporate that into our prioritization of our accounts? And how do we identify the contacts of those accounts that are actually most relevant? This topic is most relevant to them, and they're most interested in engaging in it. That really becomes where the magic happens, because there's lots of different ways you can capture that information. It just becomes a matter of, do I want to throw a lot of human time at it, or do I want to have the right tool that could potentially pull these insights for me automatically? But even in that case, you still want to monitor what that tool is pulling, how it's pulling it, and then how you're leveraging that data to prioritize those accounts. Because once you've prioritized those accounts, that now becomes your North Star. You've taken these pieces of data that you've learned from your own opportunities as well as what's going on in the market, and you now rank your accounts. And now developing that ranking scoring model is a little bit tricky, right? If you haven't done it before, you're going to do a little bit of guesswork in order to get to a point where you actually know how to accurately score your accounts. But once you do that, it's important to score them and then just straight up rank them. These are our 100 most important accounts. These are 1,000 most important accounts. And these are the signals as to why they're the most important accounts. Those signals become the cornerstone of your personalization and your outreach. Hey, we know you care about driving more efficiency with your reps. So we're going to start the conversation there. And then the question becomes, who engages with you the most and who moves opportunities forward the most? Now, those profiles aren't always the same people. Frontline managers love taking meetings. VPs hate hopping into meetings. VPs sign deals. Frontline managers don't generally. So the question becomes, like, where are we booking meetings versus who are we talking to that are actually able to move opportunities forward in the pipeline? Lots that goes into that. I mean, I know we're just kind of skimming past each one of these really meaty topics, but yeah.
I had a question around the balance of these signals as it relates to actually delivering these to your sales reps. I'll give you kind of a little more context. So, for example, I remember just doing a bunch of work back in the day, doing integrations into Salesforce, right? Of tools like, I don't know if you remember Inside View, and Marketo had their like sales panel and things like that. And the whole discussion was, oh, we got to put them on the contact or opportunity or account records, whatever we decided at that time. So sales reps will be able to have it there. And this kind of maps to a discussion you and I had a couple of weeks ago where we were like, is it just about integrating a set of data or functionality into Salesforce? I know that we think about it because it's logical that we would try to put information where sales reps are supposed to be, right? But is that actually going to move the needle? So my question is, how do we know this is enough insight or data to provide my sales reps, my ICs, but not too much so that it shuts them down and they just ignore it, or they are not able to actually really understand it because it's just way too much, right?
Such a critical question, because like if I do all the research and I pull in all the signals and I put those on a page and I leave it to the rep to figure out what to do with that, most of them are going to get confused, frustrated, or just straight up ignore it, in which case now we've wasted a bunch of effort. So yeah, like how do you take all of the signals, all of the data you've aggregated, you've prioritized your accounts, you've got these signals that you've used to prioritize those accounts. How do we leverage those such that the rep has something actionable? And then from my perspective, it's a matter of actually just boiling it down to the most critical things. So I would say there's probably like 2 pieces of personalization that you want to have per contact. And you want to have those at the contact level. And you want the rep to know exactly where to find that information. So we can have all of the other signals. We can have all of the other intent data. We can have all of the other prioritization. We can have all that data in Salesforce, but most of the time that's going to be on the back end. That's going to be the work that ops and leadership does to prioritize the accounts. And then the information we surface to the rep are, hey, these are the 2 pieces of personalization you need for this contact. This one's about their company. And that's probably your second tier personalization. The first tier is, hey, this is what this person has expressed interest in. They've written about it. They've liked this type of content. They've engaged with this type of content on our own website. And so we're going to start the conversation with what's relevant to this person. And then we're going to talk about what's relevant to their company. And we're just going to have the reps focus on those 2 pieces of personalization. If the rep feels as though they've found something that's even better, great. Let's integrate that into the process and automate that as much as possible. How do we collect that same insight for all of the accounts we're going after? And then that way we have the reps just focused, right? Because the more that they can focus on fewer tasks, the more that they can actually accomplish in a given day.
Awesome. Thank you for speaking to that. I wanted to talk a little bit about outbound infrastructure because I know this is something you've crushed it on, and I think a lot of folks are thinking a lot about this, especially today in a world where spam filters are what they are. Outbound hasn't been effective in the way that we've been doing it, or as effective in the way that we've been doing it, is what I hear. Even though, like me personally, I do outbound all the time, and email definitely is not as nearly as effective. I don't know that I've actually even received any responses on email.
Yeah.
LinkedIn has definitely been the by far most strategic or effective channel. I also think like the fact that I'm reaching out at a certain stage in our business as a founder
Mm,
is a little different than your very obvious sales development or account development or BDR, whatever you want to
yeah.
call those very top of the funnel sales folks. So I know that that's true. So I take that into consideration when evaluating what I've been doing. But how do you recommend sales teams set up things like email domains or any systems to avoid specifically the spam issue? Because like I think that's a huge issue, right?
Yeah, it really is. It's interesting. We look at the market 10 years ago and outreach is coming out and like revolutionizing the way that we do sales. Rather than sending one-off emails, we now have the capability of sending personalized looking emails to many people. And the results of that were a lot of sales conversations. And now a lot of people are jaded to email. And they're like, well, I'm not going to even look at my emails because I know I'm part of a cadence and I'm going to get more. And it's maybe not even personalized. And so there's been so much spray and pray that email, I'm seeing across the board, people are seeing way lower engagement with email. Email seems to be the channel that is suffering the most. But the organizations who don't do email are actually going to do way worse. Emails, in my mind, has essentially gone the way of voicemails. Like, why would I leave a voicemail? They're not going to respond to a voicemail. Absolutely, they're not going to respond to a voicemail. Nobody hears a voicemail and goes, oh, let me call them back and book a meeting. That's just not how people think. It's not how they work. But an email does get you from get them familiar with you. Now, if you send them something generic, they're going to know, okay, I'm familiar with how generic you are when you send me content. Or if it's really personalized or if it's tailored, that's going to give them something to think about. But you hit the nail on the head. Social, it's going up. Like LinkedIn is like a major way to engage with prospects, which means that you actually have to prove you have something to say and that something to say is actually relevant to them. So it's not only your engagement and how you're putting out content on LinkedIn, but it's how you're messaging folks as well. And then actually the phone is working quite well for folks who are working on efficiency. If you, like I was saying before, most people, if they're doing what's called a click to call, most standard dialers are a click to call. You click call and then it calls them and they don't answer. And then you click log that call. If you're doing that, you're making 30 calls an hour. You're maybe getting connected to one person per hour. there's not much efficiency there. But for the folks who are looking at dialing solutions, AI tools that are getting them to a lot more conversations, they can start to automate that process and get into 5 to 10 conversations per hour. And so now for them, that becomes worth it, because before that, it's not worth it to get connected with one person an hour. If that were the situation, I would focus exclusively on social. I wouldn't make any calls, because it's just one conversation per hour is just not worth anybody's time. So it's really a dynamic world, and we see email dropping off, we see social bumping up, and we see phone, like efficient calling, going up. But it's important to keep all three of those in mind at all times, because when one of those drops, maybe phone will drop, maybe social will drop, then we got to relook at email. We got to relook at the other channels to see, like, where can we continue to be engaged with these prospects? Not only can we make impressions, because like at this point, emails are just impressions, like voicemails, but then how do we actually engage with folks? Where are they interested in starting conversations? And then how can we take those conversations and learn how to convert those into booked meetings?
I wanted to dig into the email piece here, particularly around something you said, which was that email is no longer, or maybe we should look at it more as impressions, right? As an opportunity to kind of interact with your brand in the way that maybe an ad would,
Yeah.
or some other mechanism. And so, are we saying that we should maybe start to think about them as an opportunity to expose the prospect to your brand, to add value, and not necessarily ask for a meeting right away?
I would say there's much more traction in adding value than anything else. I would say it's important to keep your calls to action clear. But honestly, in the beginning, I found the most success in running an educational cadence first. Hey, just so you know, this is who we are. This is what we do. I'm going to send you some more content about how we've done it for other organizations that I think are relevant to your use case specifically. If this is interesting, feel free to reach out. And then I'll run them through another cadence that's like, hey, it seems like this was a lot of interesting content. This is what I've been doing for somebody recently. Would you like to set up some time to call? But absolutely, to your point, if we start with education, if we start by adding value, they might start to trust us a little bit. And if they start to trust us a little bit, then we can have that be an opportunity to be like, well, let's share. Let's see if we can actually provide even more value for you. And once we get to that point, then we can start to, build on that relationship. But 100%, I think you summarized it really well. Like, essentially, emails have to become something that's valuable, and it's an impression. It's an opportunity for them to get to know you as a rep and as a company, to see if there's something like that they would actually want to engage with.
Yeah. Question, Drew, do you think that SDR teams should report to? I know this has been a discussion I've heard a couple of times, and I've always defaulted to SDR teams reporting the sales at least in my mind, because I thought what they were doing at the top of the funnel was very much a salesperson activity. However, given kind of what we just discussed, and I know this is happening in quite a few organizations out there, and given that you are an SDR expert, what is it like? Should they be, in your opinion, reporting to sales or to marketing?
This is a great question. This has been a long-standing debate for sure. Approximately 30% of SDR, BDR, ADR organizations report to marketing leadership today. Like you said at the very top of the call, there's a stat that goes to it as well. Over 90% of organizations are not hitting their revenue goal. I would venture to say that it's probably more prevalent in an organization that reports to marketing, because if we want sales development to be a marketing function, then they will stay focused on education, and they'll stay focused on how do we share information to the prospects. But if you want them to optimize for the sales motion of conversion, then we're like, that's a whole different motion. That's a whole different mindset. And sales leadership is focused on conversion already. How do we convert opportunities to stage 2? How do we convert stage 2 through the process? How do we convert them to close? That's already part of the sales motion. So if you want those reps to embody sales activities that are focused on sales conversions, then they should report to the sales organization. I know I'm sort of saying that pretty full, like full on. I'm basically saying you should never have them report to marketing. There might be situations where they should, especially if maybe they're mostly an inbound organization and they've got a good conversion funnel already. But for the vast majority of organizations, you got to focus on how you want those reps to perform. I want them to convert. I want them to not have fun conversations. I want them to have meaningful conversations that get the prospect excited about talking to us further about the way we can potentially help them. And so in that sense, I only want to work with organizations who know that it needs to be a sales reported function. If whenever talking to an organization about joining their team, if ever they say the SDR, BDR, ADR function reports to marketing, I always have the same thing to say. Thank you so much for your time. This is not a good fit for me. Best of luck.
I feel like we can really dive deep into that, but I want to respect your schedule here today. I had a quick question about, first of all, I love the concept behind the Orum sales floor product, right? I mean, that just when I saw that, I was like, gosh, like that is something that's, I think, lacked in the remote world, right? Like that's something that I know just from a human perspective, for me as a salesperson was so critical. Like when I was just telling you that we were at our uh, offsite, right? Last week. And we were just like, oh boy, it was so awesome to be in person with my team. And so this product, maybe you can tell folks a little bit about, this product, the Orum sales floor product, and then what tips do you give sales reps specifically around like staying motivated, inspired, and productive in this remote world?
Yeah, I mean, our role is hard. We face constant rejection, right? And a big component of that is we almost face that rejection in isolation. So the sales floor is something specifically built to address that. I'm just going to take a moment here to give massive kudos to my CEO, Jason Dorfman. He has been a rock star in the sales space, especially like sales development. He has built an organization, and the company started remote first. So we've been remote the entire time pre-pandemic. Wow. And so a big piece of that is how do we actually build camaraderie? How do we train reps to be able to perform better on the fly? How do we give people actionable feedback right away? That's where the sales floors came from. So it's actually a great opportunity for reps to prospect together, to make calls together, for leaders to listen in on those calls and provide feedback. And really, it's a great way to build camaraderie. I love calling the sales floor because essentially I'll be like, all right, I'm kind of done calling for the day. And then inevitably someone's like, nah, stick around, make a few more calls. And I stick around, make a few more calls. I talk to a couple more people, and it ends up being like a little bit more productive because I've got that constant encouragement. I've got that constant engagement with my colleagues. And even if I just go in there to just shoot the breeze and just talk and hang out, there's still some sense of bonding there. And we often will end up talking about something work related. Hey, I just started prospecting into these types of accounts because I found a bunch of new traction. Oh, that's a really cool idea. And it becomes eventually sort of our water cooler in a certain sense. So it's easy to lose motivation as a rep unless you've got some way of building that camaraderie together, unless you know that there's somewhere where you can vent, unless you know there's somewhere where you can do the hard work together. And when you get rejected on the phone, it's hard, and it's hard to face that 4, 5, 6 times a day. And when you're doing it and somebody else is hearing you out and they're like, well, there's nothing you could have done about that, or hey, try this next time, that there's something about that smooths over the challenge of it and gives you more of an opportunity to enjoy the positive sides of sales, which are the learning, the growing, and the wins.
Absolutely. Drew, thank you so much for taking the time today. Again, as I mentioned, it's a holiday, and so just you breaking out the time to do this is much appreciated. If folks wanted to, first of all, connect with you, follow your content, learn from you, what are the best channels to reach out? I think I know, but I'll let you say it. And then also, if you wanted to learn more about Orum.
Yeah, absolutely. So in either scenario, go ahead and find me on LinkedIn, Drew Spitzer. I'm currently an account executive over at Orum, which is ORUM. I'm also the founder of fullpipeline.co. A lot of the stuff we were talking about today is stuff on how I'm helping my clients build and fill out their pipeline. So feel free to reach out to me directly on LinkedIn. we're all engaging on LinkedIn today. It's a major channel for sales teams. So happy to help out. If anybody's interested in exploring or even wants to just talk about what it means to build a really effective calling culture, we live in that space. So happy to talk to anybody who wants to talk about it.
Awesome. Well, Drew, hope to see you in the Bay at some point, and
Yeah.
have a great day.
Thanks, George. Take care.